Good evening and welcome. Calling to order this meeting of the Curriculum and Instruction Subcommittee. Am I naming that right? Pretty close. This says Policy Subcommittee, so is that different? No. Curriculum and Instruction, okay. We're just going to leave that alone. If the clerk could please call the roll.
Chairperson Martin?
Here.
Ms. Clark?
Here.
Ms. Doherty?
Here.
Be present.
Excellent, thank you very much. And if we can also say we also have fellow members, Mr. Dakota, Mr. Hoey, are all here, so we appreciate you joining. We did have two primary areas we're going to be talking about tonight. I know our first one is the special education metrics and KPI, key performance indicators. Does it make sense to just do the special ed presentation in its entirety first, and then we'll move forward to the other part? Excellent. Then I would defer to Ms. Desmond, Mr. Lovato. You can launch.
Sure, thank you. So tonight we're going to be, Mr. Lovato and his team will be presenting the metrics that we are monitoring throughout the year. The presentation will be comprised of the compliance data, the enrollment management for both in-person and remote, our student assessment that we are going to be looking at throughout the year, some of the instructional supports that are being provided, and then also some of the family data that we're tracking. So those are the big buckets, and I will pass it over to Mr. Lovato to start the presentation.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Desmond. Committee members, I did I want to thank you for letting us share the information, as I think there's a lot of things that have been happening within special education that, without question, should be noted. There's a lot of moving pieces, and we'd like to start that discussion. I did bring with me my two assistant directors, Donna Maluccio and Ashley Pinnell, and I've asked them to participate in helping to share the information. Obviously, I will take the questions, and any concerns I will address, but I think it's important that they participate, as they've been key players in each one of the initiatives and major decisions that are coming out of our department. As Ms. Desmond mentioned, one of the biggest factors that we'll address of many are the compliance data components. There's a number of areas that we do have a plan of action in place for each one of these areas. They are being addressed, and we're making significant progress, but we understand that we have a lot of work to do. I also think it's important that we're all on the same page for what these compliance indicators are, and so that when we are measuring our special ed department in each one of these areas, we're talking the same language. In regards to enrollment, I'm going to ask Donna to expand on this, but in regards to the sub-separate populations, as you know, they didn't go through the lottery we assigned, and there's been a lot of communication within the special ed department working with that, and a lot of outreach that I think is important to share as well. Student outcomes, as Ms. Desmond mentioned, looking at that, and we'll go into detail for what that looks like, looking at academics, discipline, compliance, and a number of areas as well. The instructional supports, we've been productively all over the place, if that makes sense. We have been supporting with preschool all the way to high school, and obviously with all of our different areas, CSA, LEAP, adjustment. What does that online approach look like? How does the transition work? And then working with Ms. Desmond's department too for not only advice in key areas, but also working hand in hand with curriculum that is taking place and how we support that of our children. And then family engagement, I think it's huge. I think there's a quiet piece that's happening in our department with one of our roles. I can't tell you how many phone calls have actually gone out through our family advocate and also within ourselves as well too, and we tried to capture that as much as we could within the presentation, so we'll expand as that as well. So if I may, I will have, I think Ashley starts, and then Donna will proceed, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Okay. So, hello, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm Ashley Pinnell. I'm one of the assistant directors. Thanks. Okay. All right, so I know that Ms. Desmond and Mr. Lovato already went over the agenda, so these are some of the items we're going to talk about this evening. It includes compliance data, the enrollment and our management of our in-person versus remote learning, our student outcomes, instructional supports, and then our family engagement and outreach. So, yes,
This is different, updated
I don't believe
from
so.
what was posted? Am I looking at the wrong page? I apologize.
I don't believe so.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, go
Is it
ahead.
good?
I'm sorry.
So as you can see, we have a Google tracking system that has been created by our ETCs and our school psychologists, and what they're doing is going through the data that we had from the spring and anything that has come in new this fall, and they're keeping track of every single evaluation. They're keeping track of when the consent went out, what are the timelines, what kinds of assessments we need, whether it's an initial evaluation or a evaluation, because that makes a difference to us in terms of being able to provide FAPE to our students. And so we are focusing on our backlog of initials and catching up with our reevals. I'm going to talk a little bit about a reevaluation process. But they do have a nice tracking system that's in place to make sure that we have all of our kids documented, and we can see where we are in the process in terms of which assessments have been completed, which meetings have been scheduled, which have been completed. So at current, this includes data from the spring, and then also anything that we had up until this point when we created the presentation last week. We do have 287 initial evaluations that need to be completed. 541 reevaluations, and as I said, I'll talk a little bit about a process to try to alleviate some of the reevaluations, and then 714 annual reviews. So every year, a student's IEP needs to be updated, whether that's going to be through a reeval or an annual review, and so as you can see, the number is quite large for our annual reviews from the spring, and also now through December, because we considered that as a most immediate need. I want to talk a little bit to you about the processes for our initial evaluations. We just talked about the backlog numbers, so you can see it's quite large for our initial evaluations. So in conjunction with our school psychologists, we created testing procedures, and I do have, it's a live link in your presentation, but I do have hard copies for you tonight if you'd like to look at it. It's meant to ensure the health and safety of our staff and our students and our family. So the testing will be provided in a space that meets the safety requirements of square footage, sanitization, the amount of people that can be in the space. They've been provided with PPE, which includes face masks or shields, gowns, gloves, hand sanitizers, and in some cases a plexiglass divider as well to keep everyone safe. There are screening questions that are asked prior to testing. And the parent and guardian interviews, if there are to be interviews, we are hoping that they would take place over the phone or over a virtual platform when it's possible, and we do have translators available through Bay State. Additionally, we're working with some of our teams. We wanted to include this point because we don't know what's going to happen in the future with whether or not we need to be in a remote setting for all of our students. So we're working with our teams in other local urban districts to identify what teleassessment could look like for our evaluators. And we had a school psychologist attend a webinar with Mr. Lovato a couple weeks ago that was provided through DESE to see what teleassessment could look like. So we're looking at all of those options for our providers at this time. In order to manage the backlog of evaluations, we made some shifts in our staff assignments, which I know has come up a couple of times. So in as many cases as possible, our ETCs and our school psychologists were able to keep at least one school building from last year. And then the shifts were made so that the ETCs and school psychologists could work as a team across their assigned schools. That this would help with consistency and cohesive practice. It also helps managing schedules and keeping track of all of the evaluations that are needed. So we worked with the school psychologists to strategically identify testing sites around the city and in order to accommodate for all of our families. And in cases when families don't have transportation to the location of the assigned psychologist, they can shift the case to another person in the cohort to accommodate for that family. And also this year, our school psychologists are assisting our teachers by completing the academic portions of the evaluations to assist in the backlog, because there's some other responsibilities that our teachers have this year as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I wanted to add in, not only do we have some processes in place for our school psychologists, but also our speech and language therapists have a system in place to manage the backlog of evaluations. It's quite large for our non-enrolled student population, so those are our students that are turning 3 and would be coming into school. So speech and language pathologists are quite a large, they have quite a large portion of evaluation. So 2 of them have been identified to help with the backlog, and they're making great progress. So it's been really exciting to see their work on that. And then evaluations across all other grade levels are just being assigned to the building SLP, and if that person is not in person, then they are working amongst themselves to identify the evaluator. And that's the same for our occupational and physical therapists. They are being assigned to the buildings, and then they're shifted out if they need to across the cohort. But the cohorts are working really cohesively with one another. Along with our school psych testing sites, and I'm going to show you a little bit of a map so you can see where they are in the community. Testing sites have been set up at many schools, if not all of them. Whenever possible, the providers are working together to complete an evaluation. Again, this is often with our non-enrolled students. They have to work together to do what we would call an arena-style assessment. And those evaluators have been really flexible in being able to test in a singular location on the same date and time to accommodate for the family. So here you can see our testing sites and how they're placed around the city so that we have been able to accommodate for all of our families. So we really did hit a wide variety of schools all across the community. I'll just read out the sites, I know it's quite small on the screen, but our psychologists are located at the Pine, Daly, Markland, Wang, Riley, McAvenue, Stocklosa, Lincoln, McAuliffe, Shaughnessy, and we have 2 locations at Lowell High School. We have additional sites for speech testing at the STEM, Moody, and Morey. And as I noted before, we have, most of our schools, our evaluators have been quite flexible, and they've been working to create testing environments in their school settings. So I want to address just a process that we have in place to help work through the backlog of the reevaluations. I think our number was well over 500, which was from the spring into the fall through December. So READ, which stands for Review of Existing Evaluation Data, it's a process that will assist us in working through the backlog, but it has a lot of benefits. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is first. Under state and federal law, they require a review of existing evaluation data at every reevaluation. Once the team reviews all of the data that is on the table, this would include previous assessments, district assessments, state assessments, classroom data collection, any data point that the teachers have, attendance, behavioral data, all of those points can be brought into play. After they do this review, they can make a recommendation to waive some or all of the reevaluation assessments if we have enough data to indicate that the child continues to be eligible for special education. This is a process that Mr. Lovato had used in the past, and he brought it to us last year pre-COVID, so pre-shutdown, and we were working on it to be initiated this fall anyway. We sped up the process a little bit and got it working in the spring, so some of our teams have already been using this in the spring, which was great feedback to solidify the process for the fall. So our protocol,
If I could just add one point. One of the things that Mass Urban has asked us to share this information with them as well too, as it does reduce testing for teachers. It does simplify the process, and one of the things that we heard, when I first got here was teachers talking about the amount of testing. And so this is without question a significant reduction in the amount of testing that's taking place, the reevaluation testing that also includes our related service providers as well too. So as Ashley had mentioned, if there's no question to the disability itself and qualification, and it's all about services or goals and objectives within the IEP, then the READ is an appropriate process, and we're probably looking at about 80 to 85% of our kids on a reevaluation process would qualify under this process here.
Can I ask, so then, as we employ this kind of, truncated, being able to eliminate some of the testing and retesting and all that, at the IEP review process that's happening for an existing student, I'm envisioning, what is it that you're, in terms of developing new goals for the next year or things like, is that still happening in this reevaluation process?
Absolutely. There's 2 processes that I think we need to consider, though. The READ itself would be on the reevaluation. for identification. So we're looking at, does the kid continue to qualify after the 3 years? With that information and the data that's collected, then we would proceed to the IEP itself, where we would develop the goals based on the identification and then based on the student data that we collected for this process.
Okay, so this is just determining kind of an in and out, year in or year out kind of a thing. Okay, that's great, thank you.
And the protocol that was developed by a team of people in our department, which included ourselves, psychologists and ETCs. And really what it is if you think about READ as a process versus READ as formally documenting it. So READ is a process that we should be using at all reevaluations. Our protocol is a way to formally document that so that we can waive some or all of the assessments. And there are many benefits, as I mentioned, but they include a deeper understanding of the student's disability as it relates to the school environment. I think sometimes that can be, we can miss that component when we're only looking at formal assessment data. So this can help us to think about the disability in terms of relating to the classroom. It improves the collaborative dialogue among the team members. It can reduce unnecessary testing on students, so there's more time on learning, and then unnecessary testing with our evaluators, so more time to spend with students as well. And then also it will help with the backlog of evaluations.
And Ashley, can you share some of the feedback that we received? Because I know we received a lot of feedback about this from our staff as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, just like anything, when it's new, they can be very hesitant. However, we have some really fantastic greener ETCs that were really jumped in and utilized this process to give us some feedback. And what they experienced was that it was quite easy to document the information that was needed. It was a great way for the team to sort of work together prior to the meeting, so that they went into the meeting really having a broader understanding of the child and their needs. And teachers as well, who are a little hesitant to not have the testing. I know a lot of teachers do like to do the testing because it gives them good information about their students, but the teachers were pleasantly surprised by how easy the process was and how easy it was to document the information. So we've had some good feedback. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about are the COVID-19 learning plans. You may have heard this term before, but these are meetings or really a responsibility of our teachers that is occurring through as a guidance through DESE, and this is on top of our reevaluations, their annual reviews, all the initials, and so it's just something else that they have to do per DESE. So we know our teachers already have so much on their plate, so this is one more thing. But DESE has mandated that the teams develop the learning plans, and the learning plans really just address how services might be provided differently due to the COVID-19 pandemic. What's a little bit different from the spring to the fall is that all the services in the IEP must be delivered, and the plan really just outlines how things might look different. So if I give a scenario, the student perhaps is a remote learner, they're learning remote at home, but we have a speech therapist that's working in person, and the parent has agreed to bring the child in for services, so we have to document that and how that will look. We know that their learning is happening over Zoom perhaps, but they're getting in-person speech. And so some of those things are happening. The same is happening for some of our sub-separate students just by the nature of our teachers opting in or opting out. We have students who are in-person learners who maybe have to get their services over a computer. So we just have to document all of the specific ways that the child is accessing their services, and the parent needs to be informed of when and how the services will be delivered. But there's no change to the IEP, so a learning plan does not amend the IEP, and that ensures that the stay-put rights are still in place for the student. And right now, our case managers are in the final stages of documenting all of this information, perfect timing, and submitting them to their administrator by the end of this week. So we should have all of those completed very soon. Do you have any questions on that before I step back and Donna jumps in? Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about enrollment, the enrollment data, our process, talk a little bit about our instruction preparation and the supports in place. So with that, let's get started. All right, so the students in our day schools and our separate programming were identified as our highest need students. And so because of that, we really prioritized them to have in-person seats. They were not part of the lottery, so it was really parent choice. So when we look at that first column, that's our day schools. We have a total right now in person of 87 students, and remote we have 22 students. Again, I think it's really important that this is just a moment in time when we pulled this data. Families do have the option at any point to opt to go remote or to go in person. And this is happening on almost a daily basis, where they're having conversations either with teachers or social workers or somebody in their team to make that switch. Also, I think it's really important that with any special education data, just to know that at any time it's a given snapshot, because of course we are having tons of team meetings, as Ashley showed you, every single day where we are identifying new students with IEPs and also identifying students who are no longer eligible. And so I just always want to keep that in mind when we're talking about special education in numbers. On the right-hand side, you see our substantially separate programs, and these are some of our more restrictive programs within our school buildings. We have the LEAP program, and that is the program for kids with intellectual disabilities. We have our CSA program for kids with autism. We have our adjustment for social-emotional students with social-emotional needs, and then we have our language-based program for kids with language-based reading disabilities. That total right now, or when we pulled the data, was in-person was 385 and remote was 253. On top of that, we also, let me do that, do have, of course, special ed is a continuum, so we have our inclusion students, or what we might refer to as our mainstream students, and these are students who are not in a sub-separate. They might be in included or in a pull-out class. Within this, I want to really, I think it's important to know that we are prioritizing our deaf and hard of hearing and our visually impaired students. Now, these students are often fully included, but we are prioritizing them because of the complexity of their needs due to their disability. So when we look at the total in-person, we're about half-half compared to in-person and remote. We're about 1,400 for in-person, and remote, our total is 1,400 or 1,495. So before I move on, though, I do want to highlight that's one of our students this year at the Cardinal. It's one of our pre-K students who is in person. All right. So I know part of the big question is, how are we going to measure progress? How do we do this? How do we measure oh, whoops, did I skip? I did, sorry. Hold on, guys. Going back, enrollment. Let's see. Hold on. One back, thank you, everyone. All right. Okay, so in terms of enrollment, going back to enrollment, we're working closely, the special ed department works really closely with the equity department and family resource and the early childhood as well. And so we have a protocol in place, and our protocol is, and so far we have registered 211 new students. And so how our protocol works is they register, the IEP is shared with us, we review the IEP. We contact the parent and ask the parent, are you looking for in-person or are you interested in remote? If it is a sub-separate or a day school IEP, then we would place. And we're going to place based on zone, we're going to place based on the need of the child and the classroom in which schools have room. If it's not a sub-separate student, and let's say that child wants in person, we're going to work with the equity office, and there is a wait list enrollment form, and then that child goes on the wait list. And then equity and works with family resource around placement. All right. Pre-K, we coordinate with early childhood and again identify whether it's a sub-separate or it's a child who is just coming in with either speech services or academic services. If it's a sub-separate and they want in-person, again, we place. If it's not, then we work with early childhood around putting them on the wait list. So to date, we've taken in 47 new students in our sub-separate or day program. We've taken in 119 general special education students, 36 students pre-K new to Lowell, and 9 students who have turned 3. So once a child turns 3, they become eligible for special education services. All right. So what you really want to know, student outcomes. So how are we going to measure progress? And so I think it's really important to think about when we talk about this year versus last year, as Ashley had pointed out, the difference really is that we are implementing the entire IEP and we are working towards goals and objectives, right? And so that's going to be one of the important factors, and measurement is progress towards goals and objectives. And the way we're going to communicate that to parents is through progress notes. And so progress notes in the special ed world go out with every report card. And so a parent will receive a report card, but then they will receive a progress report. And on that progress report, they're going to specifically talk about how that child is doing compared to the goals and objectives, to achieve those goals and objectives. So if you're in middle school, you're going to get it 4 times. If you're in elementary, you're going to get it in 3. What you're also going to do is get at every annual review, as Ashley was pointing out, we're going to start with talking about how is the student doing toward their goals and objectives, because that is an important piece of the IEP process when we're writing a new IEP. And that's the information we're going to need to also guide us when we're writing goals and objectives. We're also going to be monitoring attendance. We're looking at attendance and engagement. We're looking at suspensions, monitoring suspensions. That is also how one way we monitor outcomes in students' engagement and progress. Many of our students access our district assessments. Many of our students are doing F&P. They are using iReady. They're using some of the same assessments that their typical peers are accessing. Schools are also, some schools are using some different systems. So we have some schools that are using IXL, so they might be having some assessments that's data that's going to be brought to the team. Or it could be, they could be using RAS Kids, and that's data that's going to, again, come to the team, and it's also going to be presented in the progress report. Or they could be using Lexia, another example of some of the systems that schools are using. And then we have what I call a specialized progress monitoring, and that could be through technology or it could be through in-person. So when I think of some of our neediest students, they might not be accessing iReady, they might not be accessing the Florida platform, but instead they might be doing discrete trials through a program called Teach Town. And through that data, that's going to also be able to guide us on how, if that child is making effective progress. Or if they have a specific reading disability and they are getting tiered 3 support in middle school, they might be using Language Live, and we would be using that to track their data. Or if they're in elementary, in the language-based program, they might be using Ray-Though, and that's going to also give us data toward progress. And then we have some of the in-person, which is really around the data collection, and that's some of what the BCBAs do around making sure that teachers know how to collect data on goals and objectives. And then you have, of course, informal and formal assessments, which is just part of good teaching practice. So all of those are the ways that we will be measuring outcomes, really using the progress reports in our annual IEP meetings. Sure.
This might be a silly question, but with regard to the progress notes, is that more of a narrative, or I know the report cards in progress, like the typical report cards that we get have kind of canned comments, so I'm just curious what this looks like.
Yeah, so so that's something we're working really hard on, changing from so-and-so is a really sweet child who was lovely to have in class. That's not what the expectation is for a progress report. A progress report is going to have data, and so it should have specific data, and that's the message that we have given teachers, and that's the message that our BCBAs are pushing out, and that's why I'm talking about all of these different platforms that can be used or all of these different measurements, but it should be hard data so that a parent has an idea, my child by the end of this IEP is going to meet their goals and objectives. And so gone are the days, and I think Mr. Lovato's really pushed this, and Jen before him, gone are the days where so-and-so is a nice child to have in the class. Where's your data? Data, data, data. Yes, and so that's some of the work that the BCBAs are doing, as well as, and sometimes an ETC will ask a teacher, like, this is what we sort of train them, well, how are you going to measure that? And then if the teacher looks at you and can't tell you how they're going to measure it, if you don't know how to collect data on something, then that can't be a goal or objectives, because how are you going to know if a child met it?
And another way to look at it too is if I was passing it over to you as a teacher, by looking at the present levels of performance on what we're looking at, then it should have measured where we were on those. And so it should be a clear picture based on the progress report to be able to take that and be able to say, well, Mike Lovato is performing at such and such level with the goals that are identified through social emotional, language-based, reading, writing, whatever the case is. And so it should be a clear picture of where to start and understanding what the progress was. So as Donna mentioned, without question, descriptive data. There should not be any subjective information. It should not be opinion-based. Everything should be able to be backed by what they're doing.
One of the most important parts of the IEP in many ways. Okay, so moving on. So instructional supports. One of the things that we knew, especially after summer school, we started to have conversations around anticipating what are the potential conflicts going into the school year. You know, what can we learn from summer school? What do we need to prepare for? And so what we recognize is that for some of our students and some of our neediest students that we are bringing back, some of them have not left their homes. Like, they haven't left their homes since February, March. Some of them do not want to wear masks because of different reasons, like due to their disability, sensory, different issues around mask wearing. And so we knew that potentially those could be two issues. We could be having children who are coming back into school who have not been in school and are not used to that routine. And so we started to have those conversations. So we had the conversations as an admin team. We brought in our autism specialists, our BCBAs, and started to have those conversations. What do we need to have in place? What is the preparation that we need to have so that if we have children who are coming back and who are struggling with masks, our teachers have tools. And so that is some of the planning that we did. And so what the BCBAs and Mary Ellen Kilfoyle, our autism specialist, worked a lot on is identifying curriculum and visual supports that would really help to promote and reinforce mask wearing and making sure that teachers had access to that. And then also making sure that we shared some of those visuals, and bus drivers and monitors had access to that. We've even gone so far as having our BCBA and our autism specialists ride the bus. And part of the reason why they're riding the bus is they are demonstrating and modeling for the monitors. This is how you promote, putting up your mask. This is how you reinforce it. And then one of the things that we're also looking to schedule, and we're in the process of scheduling, is a bus training for all of the bus drivers and monitors, because we recognize that it's scary, and there are definitely techniques to use with our students, and so we want to make sure that we are providing the monitors and the bus drivers all the strategies that they can use so that our students can be successful. And so this is just an example of one page of a social story that is created. Great. So one of the challenges also is, we knew coming back that everything needs to be individualized in terms of not being able to share materials. And so a lot of the visual supports that our teachers use are really time-consuming in terms of making them, and this is just sort of an example. And so we wanted to ensure that the special education teachers not only had instructional platforms and technology, but that they also had materials, and we wanted to be as supportive as we could to make sure that they had what they needed to teach the specific needs of their students. And so one of the things that the feedback we got from the spring from our teachers is that we did optional Zooms with our autism specialist and Kara Wilkins from curriculum, and it was phenomenal. And they felt extremely supported and felt really empowered by the use of technology, so much so that we've even, I think, created a few teacher leaders that they are now taking on new teachers and just working with those new teachers, which I think is really wonderful. And so they asked for us to continue that, and so Mary Ellen Kilfoyle is continuing to do that, as well as Kara has been providing some technology support for how to use technology with our students, both remote and also in person. We also worked closely, and in fact, we just had a meeting today again with our deaf and hard of hearing SLP specialist, working with him and our vision specialist around specifically, how is this impacting those students, especially those students who are remote? What are the things that we could be doing to be able to promote? And so a couple of times we've had to get larger screens or things of that nature. And so they're communicating to us, this is what so-and-so needs, and really at an individual level, making sure students have what they need in order to learn in person and remote.
And so if I could add, some of the
Yep.
challenges that we've even seen with, for example, with our air purifiers, EDSCOS situations now where the FM systems are not working adequately for our students that are deaf and hard of hearing. So we've had to shift our technology, shift some of the supports, and make some additional purchases through the 240 grant to accommodate that. And so those are some of the things that we're learning as well too with some of our population. I'll be honest, I didn't anticipate that. None of us did, but when we started to work with our SLP, he was the one who identified it, and obviously he educated us on it. And so those are some of the shifts that were not anticipated, but we are seeing that it's helpful in other areas, but it's also causing some concerns with some of our students.
Yeah, I have to say, I think we are pretty blessed with some incredible staff and incredible specialists who are really able to know their students, know their work, know their population, and are able to communicate. And that is made, that is definitely not a silver lining. It's been a gray lining, though. It's been pretty incredible. So one of the things that we also are making sure that we're doing is using our 240 grant for some purchasing of instructional resources and technology. So again, we want to make sure that our teachers who need specialized technology or instruction have it. And so we have purchased, and here's just a few things, like for our kids with autism and our intellectual disabilities, we've purchased Teach Town, Boom Cards, Seesaw, Board Maker, Unique Learning. So these are just some of the programs so that those teachers also have resources. And in our adjustment, we're continuing, we started last year and the teachers really liked it and asked for it again, is the iReady toolbox. And so that's another support for our adjustment teachers. And then for our language-based teachers, having access to the RAVO and the Language Live program as well. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure, because we recognized that it was going to be really hard for parents, right? And so we wanted to make sure that it was seamless from in-person to remote. And so what we did is our BCBAs, and working again with Mary Ellen, created a lot of visual supports for parents that mirror what's happening in the classroom. And then they created bags, and so they've actually been going around delivering these to not only to families, but also just to teachers as well, so teachers can stuff them with something special that they use in their classroom to make sure that the kids at home have the same things that the kids in the classroom, and to help that seamless, and also really to help the parents. And so a lot of things around, just strategies like first then boards, and even what's called task analysis, where you break down the washing of the hands, and they have the little icons, and so that the parents can be working and reinforcing with their students what they would be getting in the classroom. And so and also so that kids would have things when they were Zooming, that they would actually have things in front of them. So they could have their activity board in front of them. They could have their first then, their task analysis, all of that. So they could be interacting even if they, the teacher, is virtually teaching them. And in fact, I have to mention, actually, the BCBAs and the ETCs did a really amazing job of, they took 3 days and helped IT program iPads and delivered the iPads to make sure that our special ed students had access to those iPads. So that was pretty amazing work. Again, we have amazing staff. Okay, so we didn't want to leave out our related service providers. And so in our special ed world, when I talk about related service providers, I'm talking about our social workers, our occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech and language pathologists. And so we wanted to make sure that we were supporting them. And so one of the things that we did is we hired a consultant for some teletherapy training for them. We also continued some professional development. Again, I have to shout out to Carol Wilkins, who's amazing in the curriculum office. She also supported our related service providers around technology use. And then we also collaborated with them. Some of our related service providers need a specialized, like a teleconsent, like a consent in order to do teletherapy. So we wanted to make sure that it was seamless, that everyone was using the same form and that had all the information for all the different cohorts that covered their license. And so we collaborated with them and came up with that. And then also just making sure that we gave them time. So we did a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of phone calls. Mr. Lovato has been on the phone quite a bit, always on the phone. But really, the idea is to identify those roadblocks. We try to identify roadblocks and solutions, right? And so that's how some of those rotations that Ashley was talking about came up with. Like, okay, so we know we have this backlog. We know that some of our staff is in person when we talk about, especially speech and language pathologists and OTs. Some are in person, some are remote. So what is this going to look like? How can we problem solve? And so they came to the table and really came up with some great systems to support students and families. Then we also wanted to make sure that we gave them some instructional support. And so for the speech and language pathologists, they asked for, and we bought them Ultimate SLP, which is a something that they could pull from. It's like a platform to help them with remote teaching. And then we also made sure remote therapy. And then we also got them a Seesaw licenses. And then for the physical therapists, they wanted something called Pink Oatmeal, and it helps them do virtual. And then also just making sure that they had the materials they needed for the exercise cards. And they're trying to get materials and things in the hands of their students. They're finding it particularly difficult to do physical therapy remotely. So finally, for our occupational therapists, what we did is we also purchased materials and put together, this is a sample of a backpack. We made backpacks, put together backpacks for all of our pre-K students. In there are both academic and materials that can be used for OT. So if any child who is virtual and we're doing OT, they will be able to, they'll have the wiki sticks, they'll have the Play-Doh, they'll have the materials so that they could be working with, on fine motor and also working academically. We have some extra, and so as those kids keep entering, we will be able to provide them with a backpack. And for the elementary and middle school kids, not the pre-K kids, we have bags, and in those bags we have materials that were also provided to families. And then finally, before I turn it over to Mr. Lovato, I just want to take a moment again to say, to thank all of you and just to acknowledge the amazing staff that we have that makes learning moments like these two possible. So thank you. Very good. Thanks.
So the last thing that we want to go ahead and highlight is really all the work that's gone around communicating with families. And I know that this is just a snapshot. What I can say is communication with families is daily. We are on the phone with families nonstop. I was involved in 2 IEPs today. Ashley was involved in a few, and so obviously Donna's back and forth. And one of the things that was not mentioned on this is all of our work that still happens with our private school families as well too, because we still have an obligation for special education services with amongst our private schools. So that's one thing that was not shared in this, but There's a lot of work that's involved with that, with proportionate share, and ensuring the IEPs are also delivered, and the support that's needed from our department on developing the IEPs, consultation with the service plans, and then also the distance learning plans that are needed within that as well. So to begin with, as Donna mentioned, before the lottery occurred, we went ahead and contacted each one of our families from the sub-separate families to find out if an in-person seat is being requested and or remote seat. And so that, and then our day schools, our coordinators took the lead on that, contacting, doing the same process, and then we were able to report that information to Ms. Desmond, Dr. Gilroy, and then also with Ms. Phillips on including that as far as so we all knew who was coming and looking at our staffing models that were needed. Prior to school starting, we also contacted the the in-person families to make sure that somebody was contacting from the special ed office to say, here's your transportation details. You know, we're confirming transportation. This is the address we have. What do we need to update? You know, are there any special stops? Are there any special circumstances? And making sure that we were working with John Dakota as well, too, our transportation director. So we worked pretty closely with that on making sure that we got everybody. One of the things that also occurred is when we did have to make a shift when Dr. Boyd and the school committee had to pull back and only our sub-separate families started. We also made personal contact with each one of our family members at that point to say, no, this is day schools are in school. Sub-separate programs are in school. This does not affect you. So we wanted to make that direct contact. Upon getting school starting, we also made direct contact with all of our remote families as far as sub-separate to say, hey, have you been contacted? Are we missing anything? Do you need support? And what I can say now is the contact has also been occurring with Kim Porter, our family advocate. She's probably doing about 50 to 75 phone calls a day for our mainstream families, and that's our special education population outside of the sub-separate remote. And as you see, there's quite a few. And so she's doing as many as she can, trying to say, ask the same questions. Is everything going all right? Are you getting access? Is there anything that we need to address? And we've received a lot of great feedback from that. I know the SPED PAC has been very complimentary of what we're doing there too. Is obviously that's an outreach to families, and that helps that connection with the SPED PAC. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Got to keep up the PowerPoint. I just kept going. This is just a snapshot. So for example, this is one person within our department, our family advocate. She contacted over 100 people, 180 people over the summer personally. Over 150 emails, 375 phone calls to start the school year. And of those 150 emails, that's a quick snapshot. So of that one email, could be 10 responses that occur. There could be 5 phone calls that occur, Zoom meetings that occur. So it just gives you an idea of really the amount of contact that is taking place through our department. 48 calls. One of the things that we're doing as well too, I've had Kim Porter put together a training with our ETCs, and I believe a school psychologist is involved too, right? Or is it just the ETCs?
Just myself.
Okay. So what they are doing is they're doing a training for our initial families, students who are initially qualifying for special education, to let them know their due process rights, let them know their rights as parents, who to contact if they have concerns, what to expect during the IEP process. Also to connect them with Kim Porter, which was a big part of our department, to making sure that the families can express that. Also too, the reason why Kim Porter was picked up too is she's also a parent of a student who's with a disability. So that's that immediate connection. In regards to translations, we've been using our translation services, Bay State. I can guarantee that we've probably utilized that service more than any other person within the school district, any other department. They're using it for translation of IEPs, translation of distance service plans, IEPs, re-evals, evals, every possible service. On top of that as well too is we have social media. So we are linked up to the district social media, but the special education department also has our own social media account. So we're able to track how many people access social media. We're also able to track how many people are actually accessing our special ed website. And I don't know if you guys have seen it lately, but there is an update. And so there's updated information. We have resources that are for parents. We have resources that are for teachers. As new memos come out from my department or the superintendent, we add that information in there. things that are pertinent to teachers within DESE, or any kind of instructional supports we add to that website as well too, to make sure that teachers do have the ability. Now, you do need the Lowell Public School access for the teacher website to be able to get in that, as we don't have that free-for-all for everybody, but we try and put as much information as we possibly can so it's available for teachers. If we miss something, a teacher reminds us, then we put it up that quick. And then we're also putting our presentations with our teachers so that they can go back and view it and take a look at it just in case anything was missed. That concludes the presentation. I do want to point out that, you know, I am happy to have Donna and Ashley here, as they are a big part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So without question, you know, a lot of the work that's taking place, you know, we collaborate on a daily basis, and we have several meetings within our department to be able to say, you know, how do we tackle this? What does this look like? And so, you know, I do want to say that without question, I'm very thankful to both of them, as they're a big part of our success within the department. And then I stand for questions or advice or input.
Any of my colleagues have questions at this point? I have a couple quick ones, but just to get, you know, a sense of overall scope. So looking at the, you know, even starting right with the compliance data, our overall population of special education students within the district, a district of about, you know, 15,000. What would you say is our total number of special ed across the board, not just sub or, you know?
We average about 2,600 to 2,700 students throughout the school year.
Okay. And can I ask, you know, we have traditionally, and I know that this is, you know, talking about it too, you know, the 30-day, you know, you have to, when a parent contacts, you have to get your testing within 30 days, your ETC I know it's a very prescriptive process, and should be. Has there been any kind of recognition of kind of brave new world, that a lot of the stuff gets a lot harder when students aren't in school? And is there any kind of accommodations that have been made in that way, or are we still being held to those same rigid criteria?
Are you referring from DESE and the federal government, or are you referring to our
Well, we know how much fun they are,
parents?
yes, that's exactly what I'm referring to.
So, in reference to the federal government and DESE, no, there have been no leeway. Our expectations are the same. We have right now about, I probably want to say about 200 evaluations that started since the spring that are of concern that need to get done immediately.
Right.
I can say, since we made the shifts with our school psychologists, they've been effective and efficient. And we're probably, at this point, we roughly are at about 60 completed within the last 2.5 weeks. And so we're making significant progress. We're getting there. The challenge is that as of yesterday, I received an additional 76 through early childhood. So as we think we're breaking down one barrier, you know, they're coming in addition. We're also anticipating what an additional increase in evaluations will look like after the first quarter with the shifts to remote, as we do anticipate that there's going to be some requests. There's going to be some identification of students struggling, and so we'll continue to work with schools on improving the TAP process as well too for regular education, so that we can minimize the need for special education in some cases, and also ensure that they're getting supports regardless of where we are on the timeline.
So would we be able to, and I do think there's certainly a recognition, I would say from the committee, certainly from the community, I mean, let's be real, that this is you know, we're in a very difficult situation. So, I mean, absolutely accepting that. Are we able to show in a ongoing way how we're meeting the metrics, how, you know, this many hit the 30 days, you know, 80%, 20% didn't? I mean, just so we can recognize that these are, and I think, again, we recognize extreme times, so it's not it's not taking a swing. It's just really so that we can understand where, you know, what we're hitting and where there are deficits that we need to be aware of. There may be, you know, additional supports that need to come in. There may be other kind of options that we need to consider. But I think at a beginning point, you know, as we're here in October, can we set up an ongoing monthly update that would show us how this compliance is being met and where there are concerns that all of us need to kind of bring to bear our
Absolutely,
attention?
and we're already doing that. So this is part of the documentation that we track. One of the things that's important for me when I enter a meeting, or Donna or Ashley, if we have compensatory factors that we need to address. So if we've gone over the 30 days due to the pandemic, whether it's 15 days, 30 days, 45 days, whatever that amount may be, then we need to be at the table to be able to say, here's when it should have happened, here's where it did happen, and here's the compensatory that we need to discuss if necessary. So we are actually doing that for every one of our compliance indicators. That includes not only our distance learning plans, IEPs, evaluations, reevaluations, every factor that we need to report to the state.
Which I recognize, because obviously it's federally mandated and it has to happen for every one of our students. I guess what I'm looking for, is there some way that we can get that information in the aggregate? This committee, I mean, the full school committee and the you know, ostensibly, you know, going before the public, so that we're kind of openly tracking how we're meeting those goals. And I don't want, you know, it doesn't have to be 50 different things that we're looking at, but, and I look backwards, because we did used to get this information in kind of a snapshot month by month, you know, 50 are in compliance, 10 are not. By the end of the month, those 10 will be up, and you know what I mean? I mean, and I would leave it to your expertise and your team's expertise to figure out the best way to communicate that data to us. But I think it's an important metric for us to be tracking over time of how we're taking all of our students through these processes. Because I mean, we all recognize that, you know, this is all federally mandated, that, you know, we're required, it's a legal requirement, it's a moral requirement, that we're meeting the needs of these students, you know, across the board. And that's, I had in the past found that to be a helpful kind of thing to be able to track over time, that you could see how they were moving through this IEP process, through the, you know, the review process, and it, you know, it generally showed really well the work that was going on. I think it would continue to do that right now, certainly, but I do think we have to recognize that in a bizarro world that we're living in, that, you know, we should be aware of that.
And absolutely, and the areas that I would suggest that we start with would be the initial evaluations, reevaluations,
Great.
and the annual reviews, and that would actually be an easy report on our side.
Perfect.
As Ashley was mentioning, though, by the time it gets submitted, it would always be about a week behind, so it would always be a little bit further, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
From where we are. And so I do also want to say, with our challenge of where we are behind because of the pandemic, I still have full faith in our department and what we're doing, and the staff that we have out there, that we're going to get it. I do have, some of my staff do say they're unrealistic expectations, but I still think we're going to meet it. And so I'm not, throwing that out there in the community when I think the date should happen, but I have shared with Ms. Desmond as far as what I do think, and obviously my team and I are on the same page with when we'll meet those goals.
Can I share some data points I forgot to share?
Go right ahead, and then Ms. Desmond.
I didn't mention this before, but I wanted to just share that for the initials, there are 172 of them that are from the spring. So I know our total number is 287 at this moment in time, but 172 are from the spring. And to date, our psychologists are reporting that 41 of those assessments are completed and 56 more are scheduled. So I think we're making good progress on that point. I don't have the percentages of which is out of compliance and which is in, but I think we can get that information because we do have a tracking system set up for that.
Exactly, and we just want, you're already tracking it. I don't want to make it an interesting thing. I mean, it's what you're already tracking. Give it to us in a way that's, you know, easy for you to calculate, but easy for us to understand too, so that would be great.
Mr. Lovato also developed a memo that went out to some parents as well to just talk about sort of the compliance factors, the difficult situation that we're in, and the need for potential compensatory.
Oh, and that's important communications too, I would absolutely agree. Ms. Desmond?
So I was just going to say that I think that we can come up with something that's pretty basic, that can give you the information that you're looking for, and perhaps just provide it monthly like we do with the enrollment data and our normal meetings. So we'll put something together.
I think that would be great. And I
Alright.
think as we get into our next topic, we're going to do the same thing. So I think we're really, I should say, I am hoping to get kind of like, we get a monthly snapshot of attendance, teacher attendance, substitutes, special ed, that just kind of gives us every month that we can track over time. And again, things you're already counting, so not asking to count new things, but a way to do that. So I appreciate that. I don't know if my colleagues have, yet, Mr. Hoey? You moved, you get it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You do know how, I think you do know how important special ed is to me. I tried to get a subcommittee just for special ed, and we're sorry we haven't had more subcommittees, but we've been very busy. You can just ask Mary Sheehan, okay? We're in and out of this place all the time. I'll try to be under 5 minutes. I might have a hard time.
No worries.
But let me just say, I live behind the Pine School, which has many CSA classes, and I've been watching them for years. I'll make a statement first. First, I believe the children are safer in our schools right now than they're at home. They got them washing their hands, they're wearing masks. I've been watching them bring the CSA students out into the playgrounds. I live right there and watch it all. I watch the buses. I see how the buses go in and out and what, the training in buses. That was a big thing to me, because I used to see the kids laying on the ground screaming, some of the kids. Now, I see them screaming. I run out this morning real quick because they were having a blast. They were having a blast. But right now, we got about 3,000 kids in the school, and that could all change overnight. And my problem with a few things was, I do know, because I'm always talking about speech pathologists. We have 24 of them, and with these 3,000 students, only 8 of them came back to work. But thank you to those 8. But now, if we ever did go all remote, that number could fall, Madam Chair. It could fall to maybe only 4 of them wanting to come back. But the initial evaluations, that's what I believe, after listening to all the pros, that we have to keep that going. So they have to stay in school. I'm glad I heard a lot of talk. I don't know how many blind people we have, or people that can't hear, but how can they not be in school? To me, personally, and I've been watching that, we might not have a lot. I don't know how many we have, but to me, when someone's blind and deaf, they need to be in school. That's how I feel. I just want my colleagues to hear a few more things. When you said the evaluation's 3 years, the revals are every 3 years, I don't think that's in front of us right now. I think the initial ones are number one. I do want to say that bag, the backpack, I think that was a huge thing to do. Just like when we gave out 1,200 backpacks back a while ago, I think those backpacks went farther than you think. Seesaw, what's that mean? Seesaw licensing, what's that mean? That's one question I'd have, but I'd like to.
Seesaw is an academic tool for our younger students. Typically, it's used for pre-K through 2, but being that a lot of our kids, unfortunately, because of their disability, are working in the academic areas of first grade and second grade, then we're able to expand that. So Seesaw, I know that the tool itself, to be honest with you, I'd have the details of it, I'd have to ask probably Robin or Donna to explain that. But it is a tool that is provided for our students in life skills or CSA for their academic access.
Okay, so I'll end with this. I do watch almost every morning when they come out, or when they go back into that school, and I can't tell you how great your staff is. I've only met you about 2 times because we've been too busy. I said 1.5 times before the meeting started. I believe I met you maybe 3 times, and we haven't had too much talk. But I can tell you this, I know how good your special ed staff is, and I'll wait to the regular meeting. You are going to be at our meeting, right? Oh, yeah, I want you there, okay? Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it.
I don't know if Mr. Dakota, yep, go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like a shout out to all of our regular ed and SPED teachers and staffs that we have. We have the best, I think, in the state. They do that extra, they go the extra mile to make sure that our kids get as much as we can possibly give them, and then some. So I really want to commend them on that. I have just a few questions. What about a student who is new to the district and is really due for a reevaluation? What process does a parent have to go through to see that happens? Because I've had a parent ask me about that, and I couldn't answer her question.
So there's 2 things that I would say, Mr. Goda, that you're looking at if, first off, it should be our responsibility that we're notifying the parents. So if they've registered, we have their information, we should review their information, we should be contacting them. But if it's a new student and we don't have all their information, then that would be them notifying their case manager, which would be their first line. The second thing that we would like them to do is if they're unable to work with their case manager for whatever reason, that's what Kim Porter's for. And so we have her information listed as far as her contact information and email on the website. So I'd recommend that they utilize her if they're unable to talk to their case manager. Okay. If that doesn't work, Donna, myself, and Ashley take parent emails all the time. If we don't respond to them directly, then we make sure that one of our staff members of the appropriate persons would respond. And then we also have our evaluation team chairs who actually lead the reevaluation process. But they're not necessarily in the classroom as much, and so they may not be known to some of our new parents until they actually come to an IEP meeting.
Thank you on that. Throughout this presentation, we've been hearing about the backlog of issues. How are the backlogs being dealt with?
So there's 3 areas of backlogs which would be the most significant. The first one is the initial evaluations. So what we have done is we've worked with our school psychologists, and one of their primary roles last year or previous years was testing, but they did not get into the academic testing. School psychologists have not done direct services. That's not a practice of theirs. There's not any written IEPs that actually have direct services. But what we did do is we shifted their focus to be strictly the evaluation components, and that's going to help us with the backlog. So they are no longer attending the admin meetings, which I know the principals are missing them. They are no longer supporting the TAP process. We're having our regular education teams, our ETCs will support that process if need be, and then we will as well. In regards to the IEPs, there's no, it's really about as they come within the calendar. And so our special education teachers, we have 218 teachers within the district, and so they each have a caseload. Many of those will have backlog on it, and so those end up being the priority, and we have made significant progress in that area. I'm not as concerned with the annual IEPs. We'll get there. The bigger concern would be the initial evaluations, and just as Mr. Hoey said, our primary goal is the initial evaluations over the re-evals, and the reason why we've done that, our re-evaluations, those students are getting services. There may be some things that we need to tweak. We may need to implement an extended evaluation if need be, and offer additional services if need be. But with the initial evaluations, if we don't go through that process, they're not getting services, and that's the denial of FAPE. That's the one that we have to be ready for as a district to ensure that we don't owe compensatory, that we don't have students not making progress because we did not evaluate the kid compared to the re-evals. And then the second part would be the read process. That was one of the things that we were already looking at before the pandemic, and that's going to help us with that challenge. We have, I believe the number was about 700, and so that's till December 1st. Those are ongoing as we speak. The ETCs are directly overseeing the evaluation process, the re-eval, and they're actually leading that meeting. And so that's another way that we're helping teachers as well.
Okay, thank you on that.
On top of that, I'd like to add one more thing, sorry. With that being said, the distance learning plans, because everybody's learning is a little different, it's not just part of our kids getting it, it's all 2,600. So that is also another big challenge that we've had to monitor. We actually had to get them done in about a week and a half in April when the pandemic hit. And then now we did give them a little bit more time because we had one in place and we wanted to make sure that it was aligned with what we were actually doing. And some of the bigger challenges, as we mentioned, there was a good faith effort that was done in March till the end of the academic year last year. That good faith is out the window. And now it's services as needed as per the IEP. So they're not giving us any flexibility, which I agree with. The students are identified for services for a reason. And so it's not appropriate for us to say, well, let's do this or let's do that based on what we're doing. The student needs X, Y, and Z, then we need to provide it.
Okay, thank you on that. Speaking of to some SPED teachers recently, they feel that many of our SPED students are actually getting more learning remotely than in in-person classes, which is kind of interesting. I think if you were to ask or poll most people, they would have thought that it would be the opposite, that they would be doing worse in a remote setting, but seems that some of them are getting getting more from the remote setting. So that's a good thing.
I would agree.
That is. On to the bus drivers. How are the bus drivers being supported? Is it clear what can be done with children who try to board a bus without a mask?
So there's a number of things that we're doing. As Ashley and Donna mentioned, we've had our BCBAs ride the bus, model the interventions. We've had Mary Ellen, who's been a blessing. I tell her that all the time. She's great. She's our autism specialist. She also rides the bus. She provides that support. We have a training that we're setting up with John Dakota right now with our bus drivers for what that looks like. There are challenges. We have bus drivers that are concerned due to COVID, and rightfully so, but on the same token, as Donna was mentioning, we have to teach these skills to our kids, and it is our responsibility to teach these skills. Many of our students don't understand the concept of why we're doing this. Many of our students don't. They have, due to autism, they have sensory overload. We have a lot of students in wheelchairs who don't have the mobility to be able to do it, so when it falls off, we got to put it on. So we have a lot of factors. We are working with our teachers, we're working with our principals. We had a case where at a school there was some concerns that were noted to us. We dispatched our BCBAs immediately so that they could put together a plan, and it's ongoing. We have individual cases where we're working with them within their IEP or the distance learning plan. In every conversation I've had with my BCBAs, social workers, and ETCs, we're talking about supporting this and reminding people that it's not conduct disorder. Our kids are not making a choice to be disruptive. This is 100% due to their disability. And so just reminding that and saying that it's not a judgment. So we have to be there at the table supporting them for that. And every kid's going to look a little different. We're also reminding them that all of these kids have intervention plans for their behaviors. And so if the function of the behavior is the same, then it's a matter of shifting the interventions so that we are addressing now the non-compliance factor of the mask itself. We've been in communication consistently with our bus company, back and forth expressing concerns. We have a hot list that's being designated by the bus company of students who are non-compliant, who need support, and then from then we dispatch our BCBAs and our teams to the schools and work with them directly. So there's a lot of support going in and out. We have some areas that we're struggling, to be honest with you, getting everybody on the same page, bus company, as far as understanding the expectations and understanding, again, our kids have legitimate reasons that should be supported as to why the masks are not being worn. It's not again, reminding, it's not conduct disorder. It's not a defiant choice.
Well, I don't want to get my nephew upset by making this suggestion, but...
Well, he has been good in helping, so.
I know. But has there been an effort to have a meeting with all of these bus drivers to have this explained to them clearly so that they have a better understanding of their clientele, basically, and what those requirements are and how some of them are challenged by that?
We actually had a meeting about, I'd say about 3 weeks ago. It was myself, Jim Hall, John Dakota, Mike Ortiz, Ms. Desmond, along with the leaders of the bus company. And we shared the DESI guidelines, we shared the expectations, they shared with their concerns. There's been emails and exchanges back and forth as to what that looks like. Again, we remind them that we follow DESI expectations, not any private expectations. And so it's a continuing, ongoing process. I did offer to John, and he is taking me up on it, to have our BCBAs and our autism specialists do a training for all bus drivers and all aides so that we can talk about a couple of things, not just the mask, but what is autism? What is intellectually disabled? What is emotional? Because even our kids that look of typical cognitive ability, there's still a reason with the emotional disability as to why they're refusing the mask, as to why some of these things are. So it's an education for what that looks like, but then also, how do you implement an intervention, some of the basics? What is a reinforcement? And so we're scheduling that. I think that's going to happen here in the next week or a week and a half. I know John sent me a few dates, but I need to finalize what that date is. And we were actually talking about that today about 4 o'clock again.
Okay, so the family is going to be okay here, he won't be upset with me.
No,
That's
not
good.
at all.
That's good. And my last thing is, in the remote setting, it's more of a statement. I think paras should be used for the eventuality of a student who's acting out, and you want to put them in a breakout room in a remote setting. I think a para should be able to take care of that breakout room so that the teacher can continue teaching the remote classroom, as opposed to having some kid in a breakout room unattended. Leaving them to their own devices is not a good idea. So I think we need to make sure that we don't lose our paras. I think they're really important. I think if you talk to any classroom teacher, they'll tell you that their lifeline every day is their para. And so I think we need to make sure we keep all of our paras for the eventualities. I mean, we know we're going to need them.
Absolutely, and we have paras that are phenomenal.
Oh, they're amazing, truly.
And they've been a big help for what the transition looks like. So one of our challenges is that our kids coming back, for our sub-separate populations, there was a lot of need transitioning. And so in some cases, we had to use our paras to support where they may have not been typically placed. We do have some paras. I wouldn't say it's a big number, but we have a select few that are supporting an online process. We do it consistently at the day school, and we have a few parents that have it as continuous supervision in their IEP, and there's been ways that we've been able to identify. The challenge to that is if it is a para alone with the child in a breakout room, it's not considered a direct service. So technically, that is we're not fulfilling the IEP. So what we have to be able to work with our teachers is that the instruction takes place with the teacher, and then what does that support look like? And then that's why the distance learning plan is in place, so that we can document what that looks like, and then why the change from typical services during a typical traditional setting.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
I just a few comments, if that's. Thank you. So thank you so much for this presentation and for all of the work that you and your team are doing. Thank you. I wanted just a few comments and a question. I was very happy to hear, and see the creating efficiencies, the READ protocol makes a lot of good sense. It's logical, and as long as it's meeting the needs, which it sounds like it is, it seems like a no-brainer. The communication plan, I appreciate the highlighting of all the communication that's going on between staff and families. The training and supports, I really think fantastic work there. I really appreciate the parents, getting an information if they're newly qualifying, their student is newly qualifying. I think that's really important. I'm wondering if that's happening. I'm assuming it's virtual training. Yes, I'm seeing yes. Okay, that's great. I think the bus monitors and bus staff, that makes really good sense, as well as the teachers. I think the supports that you're providing. As well as the details on getting to that hard data and removing that subjective kind of nature of maybe what had been happening in the past is so important, and really gives some tangible evidence of how students are progressing for families to understand and help. And I think also just the collaboration, I really just want to say I think that collaboration is so key, and it sounds like that's really what you're doing. You're just working a lot with that in terms of that identifying roadblocks and solutions, because it's the people that are really doing the work that can really provide some of that, to provide those solutions, or identify what the problems are, but also really looping it back to how do we fix this, how do we resolve it going forward. Just a question, how long does an initial evaluation take, and then how long is an IEP kind of goal review approximate?
So I can give you a range. So when you're looking at an initial evaluation, the first step that has to take place is we have to be able to review the data that was been submitted. Do we have sufficient data? That alone can take anywhere from an hour to 3, depending on how complex. Then the parent interview that Ashley was mentioning, again, depending on the complexity of it, you could look at anywhere from 30 minutes to about an hour and a half. Scheduling the meeting, looking at the academic components, you could look at a range from 3 to 4 hours. If you add the autism components, because one of the shifts that we made I think it was November, December, working with the school psychologist as well too, is we also do our own evaluations for autism and ADHD now too. We don't rely on the doctor's information. We can do an educational diagnosis. And so those are additional batteries and assessments, so that can take up to 8 to 10 hours, depending on the child. When you're looking at the IEP itself, your traditional IEP for qualifying the child, reviewing the information is probably approximately about an hour, and then the development of an IEP is another hour, and that would be a basic IEP. If we're looking at a student who's being placed in a sub-separate, you could be looking at 2 hours for the initial qualification, and then anywhere from 2 to 4 hours for the development of the IEP, as they are extremely complex. But those would be the minority rather than the majority. If you're looking at the majority, you're looking at the lower levels of what I described.
Okay, well, let me say certainly thank you, Dr. Lovato and your team. We appreciate you taking the time to come and update us. It's been a long time since we've gotten this kind of information in a subcommittee format, so I really do appreciate the complexity of the work that you're doing on any given day, and particularly during this very challenging period. We'll look forward to seeing a proposed report that we can rely on moving forward, so I think that will be of great help to us. And to all my colleagues, I thank you for all your questions, and you and the staff for being able to answer them so well during this. So I would say that I'd entertain a motion by Ms. Clark, seconded by Ms. Doherty, to accept this as a report of progress. We will be reporting it back out to the full committee at our next regular meeting, which, I don't know, maybe, is that a regular meeting or is that a budget hearing? It may be all, so we'll do it soon. It'll be great. Don't worry about it. So that's something exciting to look forward to. I would say, now again, we are out of practice with subcommittees, so that's, understandable. I generally think a subcommittee meeting should be an hour and a half at the most. Look at you, Dr. Guillory, all excited to present. So I would say and I would defer to my colleagues as well, Dr. Guillory, you will have a sense of how long this next presentation should take. Is it something we can do in a relatively, I don't want you to rush, because I do think that we want to have this conversation, but I would leave it to you to kind of give us a sense of what you think time-wise this will take, if we should do it tonight or schedule another evening.
So, good evening, Madam Chairwoman. I would leave that up to you. I was actually going to talk with you right before the meeting to say this may be better suited for the School Improvement and Performance Management Subcommittee, where this actually falls within that domain, but I'm happy to walk us through it or share it tonight, or...
Was that I'm unaware of many of our subcommittees at this point, which is probably not a good sign. I know that the superintendent had reached out to me regarding is that the same one, the performance? Okay.
Yeah, and you're the chairwoman of that one.
Yeah, see, so that's...
So you don't get out of it.
That sounds about right. I would say then, if we could, because then we could at that point be able to present your
Okay.
information, your part of the snapshot, and be able to perhaps even include what Dr. Lovato and his team will be able to pull together, and then we could have one comprehensive kind of snapshot, Ms. Desmond, that we could then present to the full committee, if that's within, if everyone's comfortable with that. Okay, then I would entertain a motion to table this discussion and have it sent to the
School Improvement and Performance Management.
Committee to be named later, that again, all the same people will show up for. So by Ms. Clark, seconded by Ms. Doherty, all those in favor say aye, opposed nay, it passes. And then if I could, I would entertain a motion by Ms. Doherty, seconded by Ms. Clark, to adjourn, thanking everyone for their time and attention this evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you all.